work with neurostimulators. It's implantable in your brain that is powered by a wand. And if there's a vulnerability with the way it's powered, it can overstimulate your brain and cause problems that way too.
And in our last cohort, we had 5 out of the 7 that we ran our analysis on that basically were making claims that they couldn't back up. And these are guys going for $25 million rounds, and they're still making claims that they don't actually have the evidence to back up. When you think of hacking and you think of stuff like this, you think of computers and you think of, somebody got into my bank account or whatever. Like that's what you think of with hacking. I don't think you think of somebody took over the device that's operating on me. I guess you don't think about it, or at least I certainly didn't think about it in terms of med device.
Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Med Device Cyber Podcast. Today we have a special guest coming to us from Salt Lake City area, a heavy metal fan, a fellow metal lover. And I used to be a guest on his podcast. I was at one point in time. So now he's a guest on our podcast. So happy to introduce you to Ryan Roghaar, who has a couple things going on. You have a podcast, you have a book you're working on, and you have a company that helps with MedTech as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Christian. It's awesome to reconnect. Obviously, we had you on Egg's podcast some time ago, and I was grateful to make your acquaintance then. At the time, it was funny because we weren't actually really that focused on MedTech at the time. We were more like an all-purpose, all people, all things kind of ad agency, and we worked on, broad range of clients from everything from consumer goods and apparel to automotive, and a lot of work in the insurance industry around the big, sort of national health insurers. And it wasn't until the first of this year, 2026, that we made the pivot into MedTech. We sort of followed one of our primary clients into the industry. And then in doing so, I kind of looked back at, old podcast guests and, looking for anywhere I could find inroads into the industry, because I mean, we knew our clients, but we didn't know people outside of that. And so it was great to go back through the old podcasts and stuff and find your name in there, obviously, as somebody who's pretty influential in the space and moving and shaking. And so it gave me the kind of the need or the interest to reconnect and maybe bond over this industry together. So it's been great catching back up with you. And I had the opportunity to have a call with your wife as well. And just a couple of people really excited about this industry and everything else. So I'm excited to be back in the loop with you.
Awesome. Yeah, me too. It's always great to talk to someone that likes heavy metal. Also, although this year I had some work issues arise and I had to miss Vakken. It would have been my first Vakken open air. I was supposed to be there a few weeks ago, and I didn't go. And ironically, I met Rob Halford in the airport in February in London, and he was on the same plane as me. So we had a good chat, and I said, "Hey, I'll see you at Vakken," because they're headlining for Vakken, but I missed it. So hopefully next year they'll still be headlining.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, I don't think I've been to a show this summer. I don't know how I've managed it. I had so many on the list, and then just, between work and life and everything else, it's just hasn't worked out. So, but I've been noticing too, lately my playlist is taking kind of a 90s turn, and it's going back to some of these other guys, not heavy metal, but it'd be, I guess, kind of more like the new metal types like Anberlin and some of these kind of bands that I've just like turned back onto. And so it's been kind of fun, or reminiscing a little bit about those 90s, 2000s bands that I used to like too. So it's been a fun time in music. But yeah, I have missed out on the live performances this summer. I did see some video from Hellfest, though, and that's one I'm going to have to make one of these years.
That's on my list as well. Yeah. Hopefully I did buy tickets to Metallica at the Sphere. I got 2 sets of tickets for 2 different shows. So
yeah, that's pretty incredible. Yeah, I saw the pre-sales go up and everything. I was a little too slow, but
the pre-sales, I was on an airplane and I tried to buy it, and I was like number 300,000 out of, in the queue, and there are only like 30,000 tickets or something. So I had to find this back door where I bought a package where it includes a hotel room and then a nice ticket and all that. So I went that route. It worked out.
Yeah, that's the move. No, I'm super jealous. That'll be great, though. We'll have to circle back and catch up on it because I'm excited to hear how those go. I was showing last night. We were watching a live show. I mean, it was 15 years ago, the show we were playing. God, I wish I could remember where they were playing at. Mexico City. We were watching a live concert here, me and my boys. and I was playing just it was Enter Sandman from back then. And it's funny because my kids are like, "Oh, how old are these guys? They look old then." But I was like, "They're not that old. They're fine." And so, but no, they're just so great. And some of that, I mean, when I very first got into, I guess, sort of into music. I mean, I always liked music, but the first CDs that I ever got, I got from my dad for my birthday, and it was the Metallica, the Black Album, and then this guy, Snow, 12 Inches of Snow was the album, and then another rapper guy named Paperboy. But anyway, I got those three. Those were the first three CDs I ever owned. So I wore out my Black Album. I was pretty jacked on that one.
Black Album was a good one. I think the first one I ever got was maybe Kill 'Em All. I'm a little bit older than you, so I was around in high school when they first started coming out. Metallica did.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, they were so good, and even now, I mean, it all holds up pretty well. Those guys are just incredible. They're one of the, I think when I see those dudes, and I mean, I've heard some of the backstories. It's funny that you mentioned running into Halford at the airport. I ran into Lars Ulrich on the streets of LA. He was out running.
Oh, okay. I heard he goes running pretty much every city he travels to. It's just like routine.
Yeah. So I saw him running downtown. I have a friend that used to live down there. And so we were out just grabbing coffee and he came running by. So I didn't get a conversation, but I did get a high five as he ran by. So that was good enough for me. But I look at those dudes and I'm just like, they're one of the, I think, best examples of bands that have figured out how to just manage fame and manage their career. And I know they've had plenty of ups and downs. And I think, that even at this point, they maybe don't travel together and stuff like that. But it's like, they have figured out how to really make a career out of music. And I think that they're like a great example of, what a lot of these bands could be or should try to be, because they're just, I don't know, can't say enough positive things about them.
Yeah, I agree. I was talking to Melissa about one of the concerts I went to with Metallica with Guns N' Roses, and Guns N' Roses just was horrible. Axl threw a fit, walked off the stage, and they had a chance to like really like take over the show, because this was right after James Hetfield burned his arm. It was like the very first concert, and they had a different. I think the guy from Metal Church was playing guitar, so James Hetfield was just singing, and Axl Rose just threw a fit, and like after Metallica played, because that they were alternating who was headlining, everybody just left, and nobody stuck around for Axl and Guns N' Roses. So yeah, I think like you said, Metallica's done a great job managing the whole team and the whole show and everything. It's for a long, long time.
Yeah, well, I hear it's quite the experience. I haven't seen them in years, but I hear they bring with them like a little mobile museum and all kinds of stuff now. I hear it's pretty cool to go check out.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So, what brought you into MedTech? I know you said you've done marketing and branding, and a bunch of other related things in different industries, and you've had the Eggs podcast, which you've got. I look at it now, 479 episodes, which is pretty impressive. I think we're at 85 right now, so that's quite a few. I know it's been maybe 3 years since I was a guest, so it's been quite a while. So, like, I know you mentioned that one of your clients was focused on MedTech. Was that really the main pivot? You decided, like, I like this space, I'm going to go over to MedTech, or was there something else behind it?
Well, I think the biggest thing. So, and just to answer your question, or sort of, you came on the show in 2023 originally, and so yeah, so it's been a few years, and it's crazy how fast time's flying though. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but yeah,
It doesn't.
and so but yeah, you came on originally on our episode 295, so we've done quite
Oh,
quite a
wow.
few shows since then. But yeah, no, so the big, I guess, driving thing was, there were a couple things going on, and probably a lot of folks listening can relate to some of these things, which is one of the big scary things, especially in marketing and advertising, is what does the future look like with AI? These kinds of technological issues. What's that going to mean? And there's some industries, I think, that are doing better with AI, and some that aren't doing as well. And my attitude was that the marketing and advertising sort of realm is going to get overrun by AI. Not to say that it's going to necessarily do better, but I think that everybody's going to give it a shot. And so I think you're going to end up in this world where people are leaning on their AI agents to do a lot of the work that they used to pay agencies to do, that would probably now qualify as being a little more commoditized. And I don't think we're there yet, but I don't think we're years out. I think it's getting closer. And so part of the idea, I mean, our biggest clients at the time, and had been the biggest clients for a couple of years, were in MedTech. Over the course of my career, I mean, we've worked for hospitals, we've worked for all the big national health insurance companies, we worked on a number of different sort of healthcare adjacent industries. But the decision to move into MedTech really had to do with the client that we had. They were called Scientia Vascular. They were just recently acquired by Medtronic, and now they're a Medtronic company. But they were our like number one client for almost 5 years. And so when we had sort of I don't know, every so often, customers start to call off and then new blood comes in and stuff like that. And we were sort of in this in-between period where Scientia was really our big flagship client and a couple little other odds and ends and stuff. But we're really enjoying the work we were doing for them. We did some pretty, I don't know, I think smart and incredibly good looking work for that space. Like these guys make catheters for neurosurgery. So it's like guide wires and catheters for neurosurgery. So it's not the sexiest space of all time, but we really figured out how to take their product and make it look awesome. And our design team was jacked and really happy with the work they were producing. We're getting great reviews from the clients and all those things. And so the team was just like, well, hey, this is the kind of the work that we're doing now. Maybe we should just be doing more of this. So we talked to our folks at Scientia. We, had some other ideas, other folks we reached out to and stuff kind of along the way. And we decided to pivot into being more of a MedTech focused consultancy than marketing agency. So we used to be kind of more strictly marketing and advertising. But like I was saying with the AI trends, I think med device, as well as a lot of other medical technologies and, healthcare adjacent products, are going to really ride the wave of AI. They're going to be going up with it instead of working against it, which is what I think is happening in marketing and advertising. It's our business is sort of being cannibalized. So I think for us, it made sense to chase an industry that was going to grow with the new technology instead of against it. So we stepped into that realm the first of the year. We made a big pivot out of leading with marketing and leading with design. We still do some of those things. We call it execution support these days. And we still do a few of those things, but we really leaned into trying to be a little bit more consultative. And so what the work we do now is really around helping MedTech companies figure out exactly what's blocking them in commercialization and where they should go next. So when they're trying to launch or scale or raise or do any kind of big pivot in their company, we try and help them make sure that they're actually ready. Because most devices, at least in our opinion, don't fail because of the technology on their own. There's failure around sequencing. So they launch before they know their buyer. They, hire sales before they're actually positioned and evidence is aligned, or, maybe they're making claims that they can't back up and things like these. And those are the kinds of little things that get caught when they go to raise, or they get caught to, find out, or when they go looking for a hospital partner or something, for example, they end up getting caught. Somebody says, hey man, your research doesn't support what you say, or your paper, you gave us this, and those don't line up, or, whatever it is. And so we developed a suite of tools that really help us identify these kind of pain points and inflection points, like help us really identify the problems where things start to break. And so we have kind of doubled down in that space and really tried working with people to help them build that story up and really help them get to money faster, but get to clearance more quickly, get to market more quickly. It all just depends on where the company's sitting.
Is there really a framework for a sequence to everything? Because when you're talking about that, I was thinking about sales and marketing and my entrepreneur experience. And there is a sequence, but the sequence isn't what most people think, I believe. Like, can I develop the perfect product and then figure out how to sell it? It seems like there's a lot of parallel efforts, or maybe I figure out how to sell something and market it before I even build a product, but then I have to know I have the capability to build a product. There's like a lot of different philosophies on this, and I've seen people fail pretty badly because they had the perfect product, perfect design, but they had no marketing and no sales. And I've seen the inverse work more so than not. They didn't have any product really or any design, but they sold a concept with enough runway to build it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, when we talk about sequence, I mean, there definitely is a sequence, but I think it's pretty bespoke. I think it has to do with who you are, what you're doing, what you're capable of, what your history is. Like, there's a lot of factors here.
Why do people use that word bespoke? That's like the English term for custom, isn't it?
Yeah. Just, makes us feel smart.
Do our marketing firms use bespoke? I feel like
yeah. I think we just use it to say custom without saying custom. But I think, the moral,
It sounds cool though.
yeah, I think, it makes us sound fancy. I had my pinky out and everything when I said it. It's like the niche versus niche argument. It's the same kind of thing. And so,
Good point.
But we do, look at each of these different customer interactions as they come to us as sort of unique things. We built a framework that's pretty smart and it will help us identify these different gaps. But the gaps could be between whatever your two next steps are, not necessarily what we think you should be doing, right? So, I mean, you've seen probably cases of this, and I know, given the kind of work that you guys do, you see stuff that happens out of sequence all the time, where they run to market and didn't bother checking IT, or didn't check, for cybersecurity before they went live, or there's a million variations of this. But if you're a 3-time founder and you've got 4 exits or 2 or 3 exits and all this other stuff, and you're ready to start a company, you might be able to sell more vapor than you could if you were first time in the industry, right? So you might be able to come in and sell your idea before you could sell, before you actually physically built the device, and somebody might give you money based on that. But for your average, startup or somebody that's coming out of like a health, a med school or something like this, where they're coming with a new device, a lot of people just don't have that kind of credit yet. It doesn't mean that there aren't good ideas that, break all the rules and just jump right to the front, or some big pharma company or something jumps on it and sees some exciting thing. But I definitely think that there's sort of a basics in terms of just moving through the process. And like one of the areas that we tend to, not necessarily because we have to, but because of by virtue of the people we're working with, a lot of the folks we're working with are trying to get from like a seed round to a Series A or something like that. And so there's a few things that they need to be able to accomplish in order to make that jump, right? Or to be able to make that step, or if we're advising a company or working with a company that's got seed, Series A, for example, but they're looking for now FDA clearance or something, then, that's a different set of hurdles, but our framework still sort of is applicable. It looks for these gaps in what they're saying versus what they're doing, and, all kinds of factors like that. And, like one of the big ones, for example, and it's really funny because we see this even in huge companies, is this evidence gap. There's a lot of these companies. I mean, in our last cohort, we had 5 out of the 7 that we ran our analysis on that basically were making claims that they couldn't back up. And these are guys going for $25 million rounds, and they're still, stating evidence or making claims that they don't actually have the evidence to back up. Sometimes this is just a matter of communication. Like, so maybe the pitch deck doesn't say it, but in due diligence, it would bear out and that kind of thing. But for, folks like we're talking about that maybe have a little less credit in the room, or maybe, this is a bigger ask or something like that, these kinds of inconsistencies start to create doubt, create problems, or like, I don't know, if you're a busy investor and you only get to look at 2 or 3 a day and you can spot a problem right away, then you just move on to the next one. So a big part of the work that we're trying to do, and we collaborate with a lot of guys that raise money for these types of companies, is trying to sort of almost pre-vet these people. We actually, the term we use is pre-diligence. And the idea is that we're kind of doing this look at this, prospective company. And from the investor's point of view, is it already checking the boxes, or are there obvious reasons to just, go thumbs down on this one and move on?
This idea of evidence claims brings up a question for me, because I think it's a challenge. Like, we have some claims that we've done, as example, 250 pre-market submissions. Now, it's hard to substantiate that claim because our clients' names are on the submissions that are registered with the FDA. So, and if someone asked us to substantiate the claims, we'd have to divulge client names, which is a confidentiality breach to substantiate it. So I always wonder, like, in what way can we substantiate that? I mean, I can pull metrics and anonymize things, but someone can still push back and say, well, did you just make this up, right? So, like, what's some advice for that scenario?
Yeah, well, so the biggest thing, and like I say, a lot of it just has to do with communication. So in your case, I mean, you're right. Obviously, it's, a matter of, maybe legal matters, but I mean, confidentiality, things like that. Trust is so important among your customers that you can't mess with that. So in your particular situation, maybe you're just not going to be able to divulge, and you'll just have to say, well, this is it. And you're just going to have to trust me, bro. Like, that might be part of it. So the bigger gaps that we catch are usually just in the way that people are messaging their business, for example. So like we're in talks with a company right now that is developing sort of some AI technology that will take multiple sources of input from across, if you're a hospital company, a hospital chain, and you've got a number of different data sources, it'll sort of take all that data and mush it together and give you better reporting and better access to your findings and that kind of stuff. And so they're building this kind of, intermediary gateway. And but what has happened to them, they raised some money that through like an NIH grant, and which was really exciting for them, all this stuff. But in the time since they applied for that grant, they've actually found a sweeter spot for their customers in like around VCs and private equity. And so they've started pitching their product to these types of guys because there actually is a pretty good fit for them there. But then all of a sudden they got this money from NIH that demands that they, work in the medical space.
Right.
And so now they're having this, kind of conflict of who we are and what are we trying to do, because we've been saying one thing to one audience and another thing to another audience, and then another thing yet to NIH and another thing to, so now they've built this whole narrative that doesn't work together. So in terms of like running our process against that, obviously we can earmark and spot these kinds of gaps, but then part of the larger strategic discussion is how do we fix it? So in the case of this, we're still in talks, so I don't know how it's going to end up going. But I mean, our initial suspicion is that they end up, bifurcating some of their efforts and kind of building out a version of their service for each of these two groups. And, one, so they can meet all the NIH requirements and things like that, where in the other case, maybe they can go right to a consumer or right to a business. And also in their case, like on the NIH side, a big reason that they were starting to move away from the medical side had more to do with the length of time it takes to get into a system, for example. So if you were going to try and get into a healthcare system or into a hospital group or something, the amount of time it takes in terms of diligence and vetting and everything else, it's a really long runway for these companies to try and get into something like that. Where with private equity or VC, they can just go right to work,
Right.
And so it creates a separate set of problems. So they may find that, maybe through partnership or something, they can get into hospitals more quickly versus doing it themselves. But the part where we came in and have really been of service to those guys was in sort of, first of all, identifying that gap and helping them understand that, guys, you're telling 4 different groups of people, 4 different groups of things. So your website says this, your pitch deck says that, the person on the phone is saying this, and then your NIH grant says this. And so you've got all these things going on. And so that's kind of the, I guess identifying the problem is basically where you can start doing the work on it. And then once you have the problem in hand, you can start to strategize against it. So in terms of, just going back to your question and like advice for how to actually work through this, I mean, I don't want to toot our own horn, so you don't have to use us as your third party, call your mom or your best friend or whatever. But what ends up happening a lot of times in these groups where it's a founder-led organization and stuff like that, people get close to projects, and sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. So I do encourage people to sort of look externally for validation on these kinds of things and make sure the messaging works, whether it's through a set framework like what we use, or if it's something more just, anecdotal, talk to a group of doctors, and have people kind of pressure test you or test, what you think you're putting out into the market to make sure that it aligns. For a case like yours where you've got anonymous information, we run into that to some degree. When we put together, we have a thing called the partner brief, which is basically our sort of quarterly breakdown of the types of findings that we're finding across our cohort of people from that quarter. And we have to anonymize all that information too, it's kind of to your point. I can't go running around with everybody's dirty laundry, so it's like, so we have to be cautious about that and, anonymize that work in a way that makes sense. But, in all honesty, we really haven't had people push back too hard on it. Now granted, we're not making a claim that, well, maybe it's similar to what you're doing, because like we would use it in marketing language or something, right? To say, oh, okay, well, 2 out of 10 companies did this, or, whatever. So we would use it for those kinds of claims. But I think anything that was higher stakes, I don't think people would push back too hard. I don't think it's uncommon, especially when you're dealing with a lot of startups or proprietary information, stuff like that. Confidentiality is actually a big part of the game.
On some of this evidence and marketing claims, does anyone ever talk about cybersecurity? I was just curious because it is a differentiator, but I think it's a hard thing to differentiate yourself by from a positive standpoint, but you can quickly differentiate yourself from a negative standpoint if you have a data breach or your device is compromised.
So it's sort of twofold, and not to kiss your butt too much, but we ask specifically about cybersecurity as something to think about because of having you on the podcast.
Are you just saying that?
No, I'm not, and here's why. So, and I may, I'll probably screw up the quote, so people can go back and listen to the episode if they actually want to get how it went. But basically, the thing was, for me, it was actually this big insight or this big moment. I mean, when you think of hacking and you think of stuff like this, you think of computers and you think of, somebody got into my bank account or whatever. Like that's what you think of with hacking. Yeah, I don't think you think of somebody took over the device that's operating on me. Like it just, for whatever reason, there's a bifurcation between what you see, what you're thinking of when you think of a hack or somebody, a malicious actor taking over something. It doesn't, I guess you don't think about it, or at least I certainly didn't think about it in terms of med device. Now, granted, I wasn't really in that realm at the time, 3 years ago, but we were already working for a med device company. Now, granted, they don't have a lot of technology in that respect, so they don't have those kinds of issues. But when we were creating our frameworks, a big part of what we actually do try to uncover would be something like that, where there's a gap in there. Now, we are largely focused on the claims and making sure that you're actually ready to raise and stuff like that. But the cybersecurity component is still a critical piece, and it would fall under something like, so we have a couple different categories, but like under evidence readiness or adoption friction, some of these different categories that we have where those types of implications could come up. Now, we obviously are not prepared. I mean, this isn't our space, so we can't do a deep cybersecurity dive, but I would have never thought to even ask about it if it wasn't for those earlier conversations with you. So when we sat down to do those framework, it was actually factored in as a piece of that.
Well, it's good. It is, you talked about adoption friction. It is one of the biggest reasons devices are getting rejected by the FDA and other regulatory bodies or globally, is because cybersecurity is a bigger deal today.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And I mean, honestly, I was talking about earlier sort of, the rise of technology and AI becoming more and more prevalent and these kinds of things. I mean, honestly, your cybersecurity is going to have to level up with the level of the technology, right? I mean, this stuff is getting so smart these days that like whatever you were doing 5 years ago isn't going to be relevant. And you're going to have attackers that are coming at your platform or your technology with, this veracity to be able to pivot and change and modify and update, and keep doing all these steps, so it's going to be like this, I don't know if you can picture it in your head, but like this battle royale of AIs that are just duking it out. Who's going to slip through first? Who's going to, finally make it? Is Grok going to defeat Gemini? Like, I mean, we just don't know how it's going to go. And it's, so I can imagine, especially on the device front, especially when you're dealing with equipment that maybe doesn't have, and I don't know that much about this, so I'm kind of guessing, but maybe it doesn't have as much compute or it doesn't have as much, resources to be able to manage data the way that like maybe a bigger computer system would or something. I could see smaller devices get shut down or be really susceptible to these types of attacks because they just couldn't even handle it. They'd just be overwhelmed. It'd be, I guess, akin to like a denial of service kind of thing on the web.
Yeah, it's interesting in this space because we work with really large devices like MRIs that have cybersecurity concerns, and you could kill a patient in an MRI. And then we work with really small devices like a pill you swallow that somebody can drive around in your intestines with a camera and look for things. And it's actually like a little robot that can be driven around. And then we work with neurostimulators that's implantable in your brain that is powered by a wand. And if there's a vulnerability with the way it's powered, it can overstimulate your brain and cause problems that way too. And, it's like every day we deal with these devices. And when you add AI on top of it, it makes it much more challenging. And I think we're trying to force AI a little too quickly with MedTech. I don't think we're quite ready. There's a lot of things we still don't know about AI. And AI is great when it gets things right, but when it gets things wrong, it's not so great. And I think we need to pay a little more attention to that. And like you said, it's also becoming AI versus AI from a attack versus defense perspective as well.
Well, and I think that there's, I mean, obviously this field or like the technology in this industry obviously moves really quickly. So I understand the interest in using AI, especially for data crunching and stuff like that. It probably makes a lot of sense to use for those types of applications. But I think, yeah, anytime you start letting the device make the decisions, so it's like, okay, well, you have this AI bot in you and you've been trained to do these different things, based on what you think. You're certainly going to start opening yourself up to things. So I think it's actually wise that the, FDA and those guys are really cracking down on some of this stuff, because I think, to your point, just regulations haven't caught up to this stuff yet. Like, the way that we treat or deal with these kinds of breaches and stuff hasn't caught up yet. Like, AI is just moving so exponentially quick, and, the med device and medical technology more broadly. But a lot of these companies or industries are like big, slow moving behemoths, like it takes a little while to turn the ship. And so, but the technology isn't allowing for that now. And so it's like, so they're having to find new ways to be agile and react to threats and things like that, because you just don't have the luxury of time that you might have had in an older system when, an attack was coming online, but you had a good 6 months or something to figure out how to deal with that, particular attack. And now it's like, by the time you figure out that attack, we're already on to the third or fourth or fifth. And so it changes so quickly now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have one of my penetration testers is relatively young, and AI, not a problem, a lot of these technologies, but then he went to go test the device that has CD player. And he's like, "What are the attack vectors for a CD player?" He had to look it up because I don't know if he'd ever seen a CD player in his life. But to me, you talked about the Black Album and stuff. I grew up with a CD player, so,
Yeah.
but the younger generation has never even seen things like that. But those are attack methods. You put a CD there and install some malicious software off of it, or it's one you could write to, you could copy data off of it, all these other things, right?
Well, and especially with some of those systems, where you might be able to transfer data off a thumb drive or a CD-ROM or something like that, but it's just written to disk. Like, it's not like you have an interface or something. Like, the change is made and then you're done. Like, it's already happened, And so it's not like their nurse or whoever's in the room is going to be able to do anything about it. Like, it's just going to be done and then it's done. And so, maybe some tech could come in and hook up to it and solve the problem later or something. But, sometimes you won't even know there's a problem until there's a problem.
Yeah, I agree with what you said about having a third party consultant or company like yours come in and do sort of a sweep to look at the forest, because you can't see but the trees in front of you. I've done a lot of coaching, and I've been coached a lot for high performance, just for trying to be a better human. And the analogy that's always stuck to me is we're like a jar, and we can't read our own label because it's facing out and we can't see it. So a consultant or a coach, often with very crystal clear clarity, can read that label, and you're like, how do you know that? But we're so used to, it's like facing outward, we can't see it.
Yeah.
So I think that's very important. Like you said, you talked about alignment earlier, and the company doing the NIH, this and this, there's like 4 different things. And as you're talking about, it's crystal clear to me that there's not an alignment or a coherent message. But when you're in the middle of it and it's your day to day, you probably haven't zoomed out enough to realize that.
Yeah, well, in this particular company they're small, they're pre-revenue, they're just looking for customers. So it's like, well, where are the customers? Well, this guy's interested. Go talk to him, And so it's like whatever you have to do to make that sale, So it's interesting. So there's 3 kind of key findings in our last cohort that sort of bore out during our partner brief that we put together. Which, just by way of reminder for people, it's so we have a tool called the cliff analysis, and so basically this is our sort of middle level engagement that does sort of a fast external pressure test on companies. It takes in whatever the market can see, websites, pitch decks, those kinds of things. And it'll give you give you the findings that like a skeptical investor or somebody like that would conclude. So it's not,
Does that stand for something, Cliff?
Yeah, it's the commercial launch and impact framework.
Okay.
And it's one of the tools that we developed here. And so, but in our last cohort, there were 3 big findings, and I think they really talk about or sort of lean into the point that you were just making about just sort of coherence across a team. So finding number 1 was that narrative coherence failed in every company. So every company in our cohort out of 5 scored 2 or less meaning that their narrative from start to finish wasn't clear. And this is kind of the example that we were just talking about with that company, which is they've got a narrative, but there's 4 different narratives or multiple narratives based on who they're talking to. There's not one concise set of messaging that describes who they are or what they do.
There's not really a North Star. I mean, you can have
Right.
sub-narratives as long as they're aligned with a North Star, but it doesn't sound like that's the case.
Yeah. And a lot of times, like, the founder or CEO will have that, but it's not being articulated. It's not making it to the marketing team. It's not making it to whoever's pitching, doing the pitching. It's not making it to the phone calls on the sales team, whatever it is, that North Star is lost. So that's one of the things that was consistent across this cohort. The second thing was buyer clarity was the lowest scoring dimension across all of our dimensions. And, so understanding who they're actually selling to. So again, this goes back to that same story, really. It's kind of the same tale, which is they don't know who their buyer is, so they'll accept whatever buyer walks up, and they're not being disciplined about which buyer they want to sell to. They had defined an audience that was sort of medical in nature in the beginning, and then because of opportunity, they and maybe it's the right opportunity. They just have to make a conscious decision to chase PE or chase private equity, but it might cost their grant. So you might decide that that's what you need to do, but at the end of the day, across our cohort anyway, buyer clarity was really low and just people were unclear who they're actually selling to. We see this a lot in pitch decks and things where they've put together one deck that they then use to try and fundraise or find a partnership or get a grant or whatever. And they use the same deck, but those different audiences need different questions answered. Right. And so sometimes if you don't have clarity around who your buyer actually is, then, it's pretty easy to screw that up. And then the third one was one I talked about just quickly before, which was that the claims outpaced evidence. And in some cases, like, I don't know, maybe you've got a doctor, surgeon, founder or something like this, and maybe his evidence is totally there. Like it could absolutely be baked in, but it's not being articulated across their materials. So in their websites, their pitch decks, places like that, these claims aren't being backed up by the evidence that they're putting on display. Sometimes it's for reasons like you were talking about earlier, where you've got to be a little bit sneaky or you can't say out loud, you've got confidential data and things like that. So sometimes they leave it out on purpose, which is fine. If you can explain it away, then it's not a problem. But, but nonetheless, our analysis would identify that as an issue where you're saying you can do this, but the evidence isn't saying you can actually do that.
I think the buyer clarity is a challenge. I had that in my first company. And I think a lot of companies, like you said, if you're pre-revenue or you're trying to get revenue, what you thought you had clarity on, if someone else comes up and says, I want to buy from you, you might shift a little bit. And then you shift a little bit next time. And then pretty soon over time, it's like, who exactly is your buyer? Because you've sort of made all these concessions. And at the end of the day, you're selling to a lot of people. And this is what the problem I have in my first company. I felt like I was selling to so many different people that needed cybersecurity, but cybersecurity is a very broad market. I was selling to so many different subsets where my messaging was very diluted. So effectively, my marketing wasn't landing with anybody. Like you said about the deck, or your presentation. If it's generic, it's not going to really resonate with anybody. And I had to learn that by going through that whole process of having one company and making mistakes and learning fast enough before I went out of business, and then finally being able to sell that company. And I think that's still a challenge with a lot of these founders that have never built a company before. It's easy to like see a dollar sign over here and want to make a concession for that sell, because you think, if I don't make the sell, how much more runway do I have? But then this cycle compounds itself.
Yeah, and I think it's a legitimate concern, right? I mean, like obviously, I could even say, we've been running this experiment at RŌG Health for 8 months now. We started at the first of the year. And so after 8 months, the first few months we're developing products. We're not getting any new business. What are we going to do? How are we going to make it work? So we lean back on the work that we know how to do. And, unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier, Scientia ended up being acquired by Medtronic. So we chased them into the MedTech sphere and then ended up, we may still work for them. We don't totally know yet. It's up in the air. So our primary client, or that sort of drove us into this space, or that we chased into this space, has now, at least for the moment, gone on without us. And so, so here we are going, okay, well, the stuff that we used to do was all the agency style stuff, websites, pitch decks, marketing materials, package design, et cetera. And we still could do that stuff pretty easily because it's, we already have a team for that. We already have infrastructure for that. Like that's how we, what we know how to do. But when we launched the business, the intention was to move more consultative, help people a little higher up the funnel and help them actually, solve the problem strategically. And then, if there's execution down the road, they can do it themselves. They can hire us to do it. They can find somebody else, whatever they want to do. So our role or our intention was to move up the funnel, but out of sort of, I guess, necessity. I mean, we still got mouths to feed and stuff. We had to take other kinds of work. So we still took some agency style work. Now, 8 months in, things are starting to move. We're getting a little traction, but, we still probably don't get in front of enough people. We still probably don't move the needle, fast enough, far enough to, generate the kind of business that I think we could, because I think we've got a really great product, and the people that have experienced it, it's been great for. But to your point, we sort of, even in this business, have kind of chased what we need to chase, and I think that that's real. So I don't necessarily want to say that that's a bad thing for people to do, because obviously when you're a young business, you got to survive. You're no good to anyone dead. And so I understand it, and certainly been a victim of that myself. But I think the more disciplined you can be about it, and I can even speak to an experience. Just a couple months ago, we had a guy reach out to us, and he was medical adjacent, but he didn't have a lot of money, and we have flat rates and fees and stuff established, and all this stuff. And I actually had to tell this guy no. And in my gut, I'm going, oh my God, we can't, we need the money. We got to work for this guy. But, but it wasn't a perfect fit. And what he was asking was a little out there. And, so the right thing to do was to tell him no. But the other part of me was going, well, we could just do this one, and it was like, and so it was a really tough thing, because at least in my other business, and we're probably victim of doing what you said in your first business, which was, we were an all-purpose ad agency. So we didn't have a niche. We didn't have a thing that we focused on, whatever. So we took all comers, and it was great because it made our portfolio really rounded. And we have banking and finance and insurance and automotive and apparel and we're all over the place. But because of that, we didn't get specialized. But we had a lot of credit because we were good, people liked us and stuff like that. So we were able to kind of get away with being sloppy in our marketing because we, managed to keep it going for all these years. But in that business, we sort of hit this ceiling, over and over again in terms of sort of our income thresholds and the amount we were billing and stuff like this. It just seemed like we would always gain exactly enough business or lose exactly enough business to always end up in the exact same spot. And, now looking back retroactively at it or retrospectively at it, I'm going, okay, well, probably a big part of that was me as a leader landing on this, messaging that made sense to me, but was just murky or didn't mean anything to anybody. We were able to sort of push our way uphill through, and collect work because people liked us or knew us or whatever. So strictly through networking, we were able to survive. And unfortunately, that model can only yield so many dollars, or at least in our space it could. And so now, with this business, I've tried to come at it with a totally different view, but, I still fall into old habits, or we struggle in trying to be innovative, or maybe we're, creating solutions to problems that people don't see as being a problem yet and stuff like that, So, we're still working through all that stuff. But as a second time founder, I guess, if that's how I want to try and position myself, this business has been a big learning curve just to try and figure out, where do we actually fit in this space and all that stuff. And then the other piece is just, having to learn and meet a whole new network of people, people that are entirely outside of our old sphere. So it's been, a bit of a challenge, but I can definitely understand why people slip on things like, who their customer is or how narratives start to slip and things like that, and we can empathize with, this is the kind of work that we do, so we should be good at it. And we're great at it for other people, but that seeing the label on the jar from the inside, is definitely someplace we've been.
So maybe a key takeaway for the listeners, something that they can think about.
I think probably the things that make the most sense. Obviously there's a lot more we could go into, but I think the big things would probably be, if you're a MedTech company and you're trying to grow your business and you're trying to do things the right way, I think those three findings are pretty indicative. Our cohort doesn't include everybody, and there's obviously other findings in there, but those top three, the narrative coherence, buyer clarity, and making claims that are actually backed by evidence. I think if you accomplish those three things on your own, your pitch decks will go further, faster. The likelihood of raise is going to get better. The likelihood of partnership or whatever your particular goal is is going to be more easily achieved, and you're going to be answering a lot fewer questions at your pitches and things like that than you would do today. So I think the investors and the people who are dumping money into these things are becoming more and more sophisticated. I mean, AI is on their team too, so you're being vetted by all kinds of tools and all kinds of things. And so having good, consistent messaging out there is key, in the sense that, these LLMs pick up all that stuff. And if you've got, disjointed messaging that's being crawled and pulled into different AI tools, then you're either not going to be surfaced for anything usable because your data is not accurate, or when they start doing searches and looking you up, things like that, they're going to get misinformation. So it's pretty important to have these things right. And I think there's a aspect of med device, and maybe I'm just wrong on this one. So if I'm wrong, I'll own it. But like in my normal world, I put a lot of weight in your website and things like that as being sort of a good look, brochure or a quick look into your business and what you're doing. And in the med tech companies that we've been talking to, or the device companies specifically, there have been a number of them kind of push back on me on the importance of a website. And so they throw up kind of a sloppy landing page, and they're like, it doesn't really matter. That's not who we're talking to. We're going and we're pitching so-and-so, or we're talking to this doctor, or we're going to this school, or this, group of investors or whatever. But it would be better than to just have nothing online than to put up something sloppy and bad. So for me, the attitude is like, I think that maybe you should put a little more value into the websites than a lot of these companies do. And, if for no other reason, then it's the most public and most easily accessible piece of information about your business. So if that's not staying up to date, that's a real problem. And in the spirit of these sort of three findings, the narrative coherence, the buyer clarity, and the claims, you can literally get all three of those things right on your website. And that can become that North Star we were talking about earlier.
I agree with all three of them. The one I typically focus on, the narrative coherence a lot, which I think ties also into the buyer clarity. But that's a big one for me and my team, because you could talk about all day who our ideal client profile is, which could be a company, but then within that company, it's different messaging per the buyer, and we have different buyers. So it's like the ICP at the customer company level, then at the actual person in the company level as well. And they all have different messaging. It could be an executive, it could be a regulatory person, it could be a software developer. They all need a different frequency of the same information to tune in and actually buy from you. So it's something I spent many, many hours training my team and hours trying to understand myself. And it's a very important exercise, and it ties together with that messaging, like you mentioned.
Yeah, well, and like I said, the buyer clarity score across our cohort was the lowest scoring dimension across our people in this cohort. But there was another one that's ICP specificity that's literally 1 point different. Like it's better, but by 1 point. So it's terrible also. But that notion of ICP specificity is huge too. And to your point, I mean, narrative coherence, you can have a message that's coherent all the way through, start to finish. You might have a true North Star that you guys are speaking to. But if you're speaking to the wrong person, to your point, you're speaking to somebody else that, you're talking to, the CMO today instead of, the clinician or something. If you have the wrong, even if it's a perfect message, but it's for the wrong audience, then it doesn't do you any good anyway. And so It's like, so that's sort of, I guess, how the difference between the narrative coherence versus the buyer clarity, it's so important to get them both right.
Coherence and clarity, for sure. Well, thanks so much, Ryan, for joining us today. And where can the listeners find you? You mentioned like a couple of different things you have going on. You have a book. We didn't get a chance to dive into too much in your book. Maybe next time. RŌG Health, and then your other podcast, your own podcast.
Sure. Well, yeah. So basically, once again, my name is Ryan Roghaar. You can catch me. Our primary business is RŌG Health. It's ROGHEALTH, ROGHealth.com. That's our MedTech and med device consultancy. We work with companies of all shapes and sizes. So feel free to check us out and take a look. The podcast is Eggs the Podcast, just like it sounds, EGGS, Eggs the Podcast. And you can go back and catch Christian here on episode 295 if you're interested in hearing the roots of what became a good conversation.
Hopefully I was good on that one.
It's great. We actually ran it twice. So there's a second airing of that episode because we liked it so much. So anyway, so those are the two big things. I'll just kind of throw it out there quickly. We didn't have much time to talk about it, but the book is it's called The Lid. Publishes, or it'll come out November 3rd. We're in the final stages of it right now. So The Lid is basically kind of a hybrid business slash mindset book, but it's talking about when you hit sort of these invisible barriers that keep you from progressing to the next level. So as a founder or business owner or whomever, at least in my situation, I would continue to run into these, like, the way I characterize it is like an invisible barrier that keeps me from moving from one layer to the next. And so that's what we call The Lid. And basically it's about 50-50. It operates on two faces. There's a mindset face and there's a structural face to it. So you don't know what you don't know is one piece. And then on the other side, there's a whole sort of infrastructure that's built to work against you, that's sort of built into people. So it's really exciting. And like I say, it was really to solve my own problems. So I'm excited for people to learn more about that. Right now, you can just check it out. The website will go up in the next week or so. It'll be at ryanroghaar.com/thelid.
Well, thanks so much. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And we hope you found value in this episode, and we'll see you on the next one.